Hello, I'm Tommy Moore, founder of the Bartitsu Lab, and in this particular segment we're going to be looking at the use of a cane in a practical setting. What we find in a lot of Bartitsu manuals, and because of the personnel that would be using Bartitsu, is there's lots of stick fencing. There are lots of rather gentlemanly pitter-patter stick fencing, and it's fun, and it's from the Lacan tradition of French martial arts, and whilst it can be effective, it's very much a formulated, stylistic, typically, not all the time, but typically one-on-one, gentleman versus gentleman use of the stick. Now in the Bartitsu Lab we do study those particular elements, but we also like to look at the anatomy of the longer stick as a weapon and how that can be used to great effect. And as I mentioned in most of my videos, much of self-defense is about being able to hit fucking hard. So being able to hit fucking hard with a stick requires some practice, some diligence and some technique. So I'm going to go with some of the most practical elements that we use in our stick fighting syllabus as part of the Bartitsu Lab. So the first thing I want to look at is the use of thrusts, and I think in stick fighting the use of thrusts for many clubs is really underrated and underused. You know, with a larger diameter stick I can get some really good force behind it. So now we're going to look at some types of thrust. Okay, so one of my favorites is the two-handed bayonet thrust. So again, holding the lower edge of the weapon, using my thumb to support in this grip here, in a bayonet style fashion, using the weight of my legs, thrusting up. And again, it's not just my arms, it's my legs that drive this in. Okay. So I can get some really good force behind that stick. So I can take the stick from a point of rest up to a point of being ready and armed, and again I try to couch this just above the hip, and when I strike with it from here, my legs lunge forward. As soon as my legs are forward, my arms extend, okay, like so. And again, targets for this, we're aiming for the throat and for the eyes, for the solar plexus or to the groin, so we're looking at places of finality. So a two-handed bayonet thrust is one of the strongest, most robust and safest thrusts you can do, because the opponent grabs the stick, typically initially it's with one hand. I've got two hands on the weapon. I can pull it back sharply, or I can use the lever end of this like you would with the butt of a rifle and hit this way. Two hands against one, typically two hands will win, even if the opponent is markedly stronger. So again, bayonet thrusts are something we use quite a lot in the Bartitsu Lab. For a point of readiness, point of arm. Okay. Then we look at assisted thrusting. Now assisted thrusting, we're a bit closer range. If you imagine the bayonet thrust requires some room to maneuver. Assisted thrusting is where we use the other hand to help guide that weapon. So if you imagine in range, I would use the bayonet thrust from about here, and leveraging, because it requires the legs and hips to put power behind it. The assisted thrust I'd do from here. My hand, typically on a longer weapon, I'd bring it up just a little bit because I want to be able to control a more dangerous length of weapon. It's a bit unwieldy at close range to hold it from here, so I hold it at kind of the midpoint. In the assisted thrust there are two ways. There is the grab, and I prefer, if I've got my hand like this, an overhand grab like so. And I can guide that weapon then up, over or straight in. And it's important because you need to practice all of these. If the opponent's taller, I need to be able to drive it up into the throat. If they're the same height, I might just drive this straight into the eyes. If they're shorter, I might need to drive it down into the collarbone. But the assisted thrust helps me aim. Think of it, if you're a follower of HEMA, historical European martial arts, you'll be aware of the notion of half swording. If I'm fighting an opponent in armour, I might need two hands on the sword to get the point of the sword into the vulnerable spots. And in principle, it's not too different with the stick. We get an assisted thrust. You can do it with a grab, up, lateral, down, very important. And again, you can aim for the vulnerable spots, the collarbone, behind the ear, into the eye. These are really good places for that assisted thrust. You can get decent power off that. Remember to drive with the hips, the shoulders and the elbows. What I prefer is using the flat of the arm. So using the flat of the arm, I can guide it, but I can also detach and use that arm for other purposes. So if we're here, if I grab it, all I can do is repeatedly thrust and drive with this. If I use my arm, I can still get the sense of direction, so I can still manipulate where the stick goes, but I could also make an attachment. So I might thrust, grab the clothing and finish off. So I might assisted thrust, grab the clothing, step back, hit with something more solid. So again, by freeing up this hand, I've got the opportunity to grab clothes, arms, hair, whatever. I also get the opportunity to strike with this offhand. So I might thrust this in, then do some kind of shuto strike from jiu-jitsu. So 1, 2, 3. It's all about giving me the opportunity to cause damage with the thrust, and most often with the stick, using that opportunity to then step back and use it as a powerful, percussive swinging weapon. So, you get the idea. We're using the guiding arm. And again, I typically aim to guide it with the wrist because I get really good control as if it were my hand, but I can then free this up for other strikes. Okay. Then we've got very long distance thrusts. So the one-handed long distance thrust, and I find this works with a passing step. So I step my rear leg forward and at the same time longer thrust. I find that you can only pull this off once or twice. So again, this is more of a surprise thrust, and I would really recommend compounding it. So 1, then I might step again, 2. So passing step, long thrust, step again, 2. So you can see a long one-handed thrust. You can do that without stepping, of course you can, but I find this makes better use when the opponent thinks you're out of range and you're going for that cheeky long thrust before moving into something else. And you can combine these together. So I might go long single-handed thrust into supported thrust or into a bayonet thrust. Again, this is really good for maximum long distance. Here, or with a step. Here, follow up with assisted or bayonet. Either way works really, really well. These are cheeky instant shots. They have a high rate of failure, so do play with them, do practice with them. Sometimes you can pull them off, especially if you're sparring, but I'd say for any serious situation, sticking to the bayonet style or the assisted thrusts is really, really important. Okay, then we're going to look at sort of a bit closer range striking, some of the things that we've found successful in the Bartitsu lab. Once we get here, and you get a lot of clubs which work in shillelagh type fashion, and that does happen. As soon as we compress, as soon as we get to a grappling range, if I'm sensible, I'll have the stick up high. If I don't have the stick up high and I'm compressed, there's nothing I can do about it. So I've got the stick up high. The 2 strikes which I found most effective are a semicircular downward strike to the bridge of the nose. So cracking this down. Importantly, sink your body weight with it. So instead of just doing this, the body sinks, the knees dip, and that crashes down in a short, sharp arc over the nose. If they've got a grip on you, a double-handed grip, you can smash this down on the grip, but I find that very rarely happens in a stick grapple. But if we get to a compression point here, I can crack down, step back, do something more deadly. So we're here, crack down, step back, do something more deadly. So I quite like this technique. Second one is the push up. So if the stick is a bit lower, and really this should be an accident. If we end up in a stick grapple, I want the stick a little bit higher so I can hit you in the face with it, I can dig it into places. If it's low, it's probably an accident. But if it is low, we then do a push up. And the best way to think about it is to roll the wrists. So if it's low, roll the wrists so the palms are facing forward, elbows in nice and tight, and you drive this diagonally upwards. Turn up here, we're a bit close, we roll the wrists. Here, we're a bit close, we roll the wrists, burst this. And again, bring your body weight with it, allow your body weight to drive it forward. Here. So, those are some short range techniques. Also things to think about are the assisted use of the fist. Now, if you're holding the weapon in your fist, you've essentially got a loaded fist. It's got a bit more weight into it. So don't neglect being able to punch the elbow with the stick in your hand. So it might be we end up too close. So I might need to punch, pommel, step back and hit. So I'm here, making sure you know how to use this as a loaded fist. When it's in a single hand, vertical strikes are most common and desired. When we're up close, this kind of kayaking motion can kind of happen. So we find ourselves in a position where we're throwing short, sharp hooks with the weapon up close. With a little bit more distance, we can drive through with a normal pugilism style lead off. So using this with a loaded fist. And another thing you'll find in our particular system of Bartitsu stick boxing is that we'll compound the blows. So we'll aim, for example, for a pommel and then a strike, a pommel and then a strike. So we'll go okay. Excuse me, I'm working in a garden, so this gets in my way. But it's a good metaphor to be very aware of where you're using your stick. So, pommel, strike, pommel, strike. Okay. What we also get is cutting to thrust and thrusting to cut. So by that I mean we may thrust and then hit. So there's never just a thrust by itself. A thrust is always followed by a cut, or a cut is always followed by a thrust. So for example, I might strike here and then strike back. So those are some of the guiding principles of how in the Bartitsu lab we use some of our stick boxing. Thank you.